Have you ever wondered, quietly, in the stillness of your home, whether the love you gave, the sacrifices you made, and the years you devoted could ever be enough for the people you raised? I've asked myself that question countless times, during sleepless nights, while staring at the photographs on my walls, each picture a frozen memory of laughter, of small triumphs, but sometimes a quiet reminder of the distance that can grow between a mother and her child. I remember holding my son when he was just a boy, the way his little hands would clutch mine, and how he trusted me completely, thinking a mother's love could protect him from anything the world might throw at him. I thought every scraped knee, every tear wiped from his face, every long night spent worrying about his health or his happiness would be repaid with gratitude, respect, and affection in the years to come. And yet now, decades later, I sit alone in a quiet room that once echoed with his laughter, the walls still filled with echoes of birthday songs, of bedtime stories, of mornings spent with pancakes and hurried school lunches. My son, grown now, in his late 20s, with his own life, his own struggles, his own mistakes. And I find myself asking, with a trembling heart, whether giving everything, truly everything, can leave a mother empty, not just of possessions, but of trust and hope, and the quiet assurance that the people you love will always be there for you. The little choices, the compromises, the endless devotion. Were they ever truly seen? Or were they simply expected? Like the air I breathed, or the roof that sheltered us all, or the meals I cooked night after night, in a home that was mine as much as theirs. Tonight, as I cradle a cup of tea, long since gone cold in my hands, I think of the countless hours I've spent, worrying, planning, giving, hoping, and the fear that maybe it was all not enough. And yet, even in that fear, there is a stubborn, quiet love, a love that cannot be measured, that will always reach out, even when it might be ignored, even when it might be taken for granted. Because soon, very soon, I would be asked to make a choice I never imagined, one that might cost me not just my home, but everything I've held dear, everything that reminded me of the life I built for my son. And when I think of what I might lose first, my heart drifts back to that house, the house that was more than walls, the place where I laughed, cried, and lived every day of my life, the home that shaped me, that held me, that gave me safety I had always taken for granted. It wasn't just bricks and wood. It was the smell of cookies fresh from the oven, the sunlight spilling across the living room floor in the early morning, the quiet moments in my favorite chair, wrapped in a warm cardigan, breathing in the comfort of a home that had always been mine. Every corner carried a memory. The garden where I planted flowers each spring, the little kitchen table where countless meals were shared, and the laughter that once filled every room. This house was my independence, my proof that after decades of giving, working, and caring, I had a place of my own, a space where I could exist as a mother, as a woman, as someone who mattered. And yet, the thought of giving it all away, even for my son, sent a chill through me, a fear I had tried not to imagine. What if I was left, old, alone, without a place to call my own? What if the life I built, the safety I counted on, slipped away just like that. As I walked slowly through each room, touching door frames, windows, little spaces that had witnessed my life, I felt a shadow of unease, a quiet warning that this house, my home, might not stay mine for long, and that what I treasured most might soon be gone forever. The house might have been my sanctuary, but my son, he was my heart. I remember the very first time I held him in my arms, the tiny warmth of his body pressed against mine, his little fingers curling around mine, as if he already knew I would always be there. Raising him was everything I had ever dreamed of, and so much harder than I imagined. There were nights I stayed awake, listening to his soft breathing, worrying he was cold, hungry, or frightened. There were mornings I rose before the sun to make sure he had breakfast, clothes, and a hug, before the world demanded too much of him. I gave him my patience, my time, my strength, and sometimes even the little comforts I had denied myself, so he could have what I could not. I watched him grow, from a curious, stubborn little boy to a young man with dreams and ambitions. I remember two milestones above all: his first day of school, his eyes wide with nervous excitement, and the day he graduated, smiling with a pride that mirrored my own. I thought I had done everything right. Every bedtime story, every scraped knee, every word of encouragement would be repaid with love and respect in the years to come. And yet, even with all the pride, all the love, I knew that raising a child, even one you pour your whole heart into, never comes with guarantees. The day he came to me, I could tell something was wrong the moment he walked in, his hands fidgeting, a quiet sigh escaping his lips, his eyes darting briefly to the floor, avoiding mine. The weight of worry pressed across his face, and I knew he carried something he could not face alone. He sat down slowly, took a deep, trembling breath, and looked at me with hesitation, a mixture of hope and fear that made my heart ache. And in that moment, I realized the choice he was about to ask of me could change everything and leave me wondering if love alone would ever be enough. I had barely caught my breath from the weight of his eyes. When he finally spoke, "Mom," he began, his voice low, hesitant, "there's something I need to tell you." I nodded slowly, but my heart was already racing. He told me about the debts, the bills, the loans, the opportunities slipping away, the mistakes that had piled up faster than he ever expected. As he spoke, I realized this wasn't a small favor. This wasn't something a few saved dollars could fix. This could change everything for both of us. His eyes searched mine, pleading, hesitant, almost apologetic. "You don't have to say yes," he whispered. But I didn't know who else to turn to. I could feel the weight of every word, every glance, every pause pressing on me. I wanted to stop him, to remind him that he was grown, that some mistakes must be faced alone. But the boy I had raised, the man I still loved, looked at me with hope, and the tug in my chest was impossible to ignore. He took a deep breath, his hands fidgeting, a quiet sigh escaping, his eyes briefly to the floor, then back to me, hesitation and fear written across every line of his face. "Mom," he said, his voice trembling, "I don't know who else to ask. And in that instant, everything I had held onto, my sense of security, my home, my independence, hovered in the air like a fragile shad, waiting to see if I would give it all away. For love, for family, for him, the cost, it already felt heavy. And I knew, once the answer was given, nothing would be the same. I braced myself, waiting for him to finally say what he needed. "Mom," he began, his voice low, hesitant. "There's something I need to tell you." I nodded slowly, but my heart was already racing. He told me about the debts, the bills, the loans, the opportunities slipping away, the mistakes that had piled up faster than he ever expected. As he spoke, I realized this wasn't a small favor. This wasn't something a few saved dollars could fix. This could change everything. And then he whispered it. The number, the amount. And my chest went cold. $400,000. I repeated it in my mind. 400,000. 400,000. I sank into my chair, trying to steady my hands, trying to breathe. The boy I had raised, grown now, reaching out to me. And I knew the love that had guided me all my life would not let me say no. The fear pressed down like a storm. $400,000. A house I had spent decades in. Everything I had built with my own hands. I walked through the rooms, touching the walls, the windows, the floors, each step heavier than the last. If I said yes, my sanctuary, my independence, my home might be gone forever. My mind raced through possibilities. Savings, loans, asking others. None would cover this. None would give him what he needed. And then the terrible truth settled in. The only way I could help, the only way I could give him a chance, was to sell my home. I sank back into my chair, staring at the walls, the pictures, and whispered to myself, $400,000 and my home for my son. And I knew nothing would ever be the same again. That night, sleep did not come. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, the shadows stretching long and thin in the dim lamplight. My mind would not rest. My son waiting, hoping, needing, and the weight of what he asked pressed down on me. I thought of him as a little boy, the tiny warmth of his body in my arms, the scraped knees, the first day of school, the graduation day. And I felt the familiar tug in my chest, the pull that says, I must help no matter the cost. I sat up, gripping the blanket tightly, and paced slowly across the room. The wind whispered outside. The floors creaked beneath my feet, and the quiet only made the fear louder. I imagined walking through the empty rooms. If the sale went through, the mornings without my favorite chair, sunlight spilling on the floor, the smells of my cooking fading into someone else's hands. My mind raced through possibilities, savings, loans, asking others. None would cover it. None would give him what he needed. And I realized the only way to help, the only way to give him a chance, was to sell my home. I walked to the window, staring at the quiet street below, the life I had built all around me, and felt a shiver of unease. I had made my decision, or at least part of it. But certainty, peace, none of it had arrived. All that remained was fear, and the shadow of doubt lingering in the corners of my heart. Had I done the right thing? Or had I already taken the step that would change everything forever? The day arrived faster than I had expected. Sunlight spilled across the walls I had lived in for decades, and already I felt the weight of what was coming. I walked through each room, touching the banister, the windowsill, the floors, each step heavier than the last. The house smelled faintly of coffee, but beneath it, a hollow sense of endings. At the office, the papers lay spread across the table. The ticking clock filled the silence. The agent's face was neutral, impersonal. Her voice rushed, mechanical, as if she wanted to move this along quickly. I picked up the pen, my hands trembling, not just from nerves, but from the sudden realization that after this, I would have nowhere that truly felt like home. No walls that belonged to me. No morning sun in a chair I had claimed as my own. I might become a burden. I might never feel at home again. Each signature felt heavier than the last. The papers were not just legal documents. They were a ledger of love and loss. My safety and independence reduced to ink on paper. When the last papers were signed, the keys handed over, I felt a cold shock pass through me. Then the check, crisp in my hands, exactly what he needed. And yet, I stared at it, and my chest tightened. Decades of living, my sanctuary, my home, all reduced to a number. The emptiness came fast, sudden and suffocating, and I realized this was not just a sacrifice. This was the moment everything began to unravel. I had given him what he needed, and yet I feared. For the first time in my life, I had nothing left that was truly mine. The first morning after the sale, I woke to a quiet that felt different. The rooms no longer smelled like home. The sunlight on the floor seemed sharper, emptier. I told myself this was only temporary. Helping him now, giving him what he needed, would bring relief, stability, maybe even happiness. I brewed my tea slowly, the steam curling up like a promise. I sipped it carefully, letting the warmth settle in my chest. I walked through the empty counter, traced the windowsill with my fingers, trying to hold on to something familiar. For a fleeting moment, I almost felt free. Not free from worry, but free from immediate guilt. Yet doubt crept in. Would the money truly be enough? Would he appreciate it? Could mistakes slip through his fingers again? I looked out the window, at the quiet street, moving on without me. And somewhere beyond these walls, I sensed the world was shifting in ways I could not control. Hope and doubt collided inside me. A tug at my chest I could not ignore. The warmth of tea, the sunlight, my cardigan. All comforts now fragile, easily lost. I shuffled slowly through the small remaining spaces, picking up a photograph, adjusting a chair. Each gesture a tiny attempt to hold the world steady. Then the thought came, sharp and unwelcome. Even love, even the deepest care, could not shield me from the consequences of this choice. I felt a small shiver run through me, a quiet, uneasy certainty that the first signs of trouble were already threading through my days. The days that followed were strange, disorienting. I moved from one temporary place to another, each room smaller than the last, each bed a little too narrow, each wall holding no history of my life. My belongings were packed into suitcases, clothes folded neatly, photographs tucked carefully. But all the comfort they once brought felt impossibly far away. I tried to tell myself it was temporary, that soon I would move in with my son. But the thought carried a quiet anxiety, a small, gnawing fear I could not shake. A phone call came one afternoon. He sounded hurried, distracted, polite. And for a brief moment, I felt the first prick of worry. Was he truly ready for me to arrive? Would I fit into the life he had built without me? Each night I sat with my tea, listening to sounds that were not mine, feeling fatigue in muscles I had never noticed before, not sleeping well, skipping small routines that once anchored my days. I carried my photos with me, trying to anchor myself, but each step reminded me that I had nothing permanent to return to. The weight of suitcases became more than physical, it pressed on my heart. I looked at my reflection in unfamiliar mirrors, my cardigan hanging loosely on shoulders that no longer felt secure. And I felt the subtle ache of dependence, the fear of being unwanted, or worse, in the way. Still, I told myself to be patient, that love would carry me through, that the sacrifice had meaning, and soon I would see my son. But the anticipation was tangled with dread, and as I packed my few belongings again, folding memories carefully into suitcase corners, I could not ignore the small voice whispering, "Are you walking into a place you'll truly belong, or just stepping into more uncertainty?" The drive to his house felt longer than it should, each mile stretching between hope and fear. And I realized, deep down, that nothing would be the same once I arrived. The first days at my son's house were quiet, too quiet. I unpacked the last of my suitcases, arranging the few items I had brought with care. But even the familiar warmth of his home now felt different. He smiled when I arrived, polite, gentle. But there was a distance I could feel, a hurried glance at the clock, a soft sigh, barely audible. And one evening, he took his plate and walked into the kitchen while I lingered in the living room, eating alone, watching him move as if I weren't there. That small, undeniable moment, it cut deeper than words could. The phone calls became shorter. Just checking in, Mom, I'll call you later. Later stretched into hours, sometimes days. His eyes didn't meet mine, as they once did. His hands fidgeted, but warmth had gone from his gestures. Even small conversations felt hurried, like he was somewhere else, present physically, but not fully with me. At first, I tried to excuse it. Perhaps he was busy. Perhaps he didn't notice. But the quiet anxiety in my chest would not go away. Each night I would sit alone, wrapping my cardigan tightly around my shoulders, tracing the walls he had built without me, and wondering if I had become inconvenient. Even the small routines I had counted on, tea in the morning, a shared laugh in the evening, began to feel absent, like signals I could no longer rely on. And yet I hesitated to confront him, unsure when to speak, unsure what to say, fearful of what I might discover or confirm. By the end of the week, I had noticed it clearly. A subtle withdrawal, the way he avoided sitting down with me, spoke quickly while moving away, responded without warmth, and for the first time I felt it, the quiet, creeping distance between us. and the growing suspicion that this was not just stress. This was something deeper. I closed my eyes, took a deep breath, and whispered to myself softly, almost afraid, "Am I still welcome here? Or is there a truth I am too scared to face?" I had tried to keep my hope alive, to tell myself that this help was temporary, that love alone could carry us through. But one morning, as I washed the dishes, hands still damp, steam curling from my tea, I felt the first real knot of fear in my chest. I cleared my throat carefully and asked the question I had avoided for so long. "Sweetheart, I was wondering about the money. The $400,000 I gave you. Do you have a plan for repayment?" The words hung in the kitchen, heavy, trembling, vulnerable. I twisted the dishcloth in my hands, trying not to shake. He paused, looked away, out the window. A faint sigh, his fingers brushing through his hair. "Mom, I don't know, it's complicated. Let's not talk about it now." Complicated. The word landed like a cold draft across my chest. The certainty I had clung to, that my sacrifice was safe, respected, slipped from my grasp. I pressed gently, trying not to accuse. "I just need to know, because I have to plan my life too. I gave you everything I could. I need reassurance." He avoided my gaze completely, walked past me, speaking without warmth. A short, nervous laugh, polite, distracted, distant. I felt a chill. The sun fell across the counter, but the warmth didn't reach me. The house felt larger, too quiet. Trust, family, love, everything I had counted on, was cracking beneath me. I pressed a hand to the window, tracing the morning light. A small gesture, but it grounded me, even as dread settled deeper. And somewhere in that light, I realized this was no longer just a question of money. It was a measure of how much, or how little, I truly mattered now. And as I stood there, letting the words, "Let's not talk about it now," echo, a sinking feeling spread through me. A taste of disbelief. A quiet fear that something I had built, something I had trusted with all my heart, was slipping beyond my reach, leading me toward a truth I was not ready to see. A silence I could no longer ignore. After that morning, a quiet shadow settled over the house. Not the house I had loved, the walls, the windows, the sunlight, but the home I had trusted would always hold me safe. It wasn't just my son anymore. It was his wife, her presence, or rather her absence, that began to weigh. The first few times, I tried to brush it off. A missed greeting, a polite smile that never quite reached her eyes. I told myself she was busy. Tea. Read just like anyone else. But the pattern grew. At the dinner table, I reached for the casserole, and she shifted her plate away. A small, deliberate movement that left my hand hovering. Her eyes flicked to the window, pretending not to notice me. I froze for a heartbeat, then lowered my hand, my voice tight but polite. Other times, I tried to join conversation. A gentle question, a soft laugh. And she would answer briefly, then turn away, redirecting the words to someone else. Even my son remained quiet, nodding politely, avoiding eye contact. I realized then it wasn't accidental. Her coldness was real, and his inaction made it worse. Each glance, each silent dismissal, each careful avoidance cut deeper than I could have imagined. The loneliness was creeping in. Not fleeting, not temporary, but the kind that settles into your chest, your hands, your bones. It whispers at night, reminding you you are seen less, valued less, slowly becoming invisible. I tried to carry on, to offer small kindnesses, to help where I could. She smiled politely when I brought tea, but her eyes were elsewhere. One evening, she laughed quietly at a joke, without me, while I sat, unnoticed, tracing the rim of my cup. A sigh slipped past my lips, soft, almost unnoticed. The house that once welcomed me with warmth now felt like a stage where I didn't belong. Each movement was measured, each word carefully placed. And yet I kept trying. I sank into the chair, my fingers tightening around the cup. I watched her quietly, watched him remain neutral, offering neither warmth nor defense. And I realized this silence was not just a pause. It was a signal, a beginning, a first taste of a truth I could no longer ignore. And yet the silence was only the beginning. The first morning in my son's house, I woke to a kitchen that smelled like breakfast, but not mine to prepare. I had imagined warmth, a sense of being needed, a place where love would cushion the edges of my loss. Instead, I felt invisible. Coffee cups were set without asking if I wanted one. The newspapers I once shared with him were already folded, read, and put aside. A chair pulled out, but not for me. I offered to help with the dishes. "Mom, it's fine," he said, not even looking at me. His eyes darted to his wife, waiting for her to take over. I realized then I wasn't helping. I was in the way. Over the next few days, small humiliations piled up like weight pressing on my chest. A sigh that followed me from room to room. Instructions given over my shoulder. Questions ignored or met with a distracted glance. One afternoon, I tried to sit with him at the table. He glanced at his wife, then at his phone, and excused himself. No words, no warmth. Just distance, and a quiet understanding settling into my bones. Even my own son, the boy I had raised with every ounce of patience, every sleepless night, began to fade into shadows. He nodded politely, answered questions in brief, and let his wife take the lead. I had become background noise, a presence tolerated, not welcomed. I stood in the hallway one evening, teacup in hand, unsure whether to go to the table or retreat. Each step measured, each breath heavy, every glance seemed to confirm it. By the end of that week, the truth settled in quietly, like a chill creeping along the walls. I was no longer helping. I was inconvenient. I was noticed less. But even as this thought pressed against me, part of me clung to hope. Maybe it was just the adjustment. Maybe they didn't mean it. Maybe tomorrow would be different. And yet the weight of those small moments, the cold avoidance, I couldn't shake the creeping realization that I was already on the outside of the life I had once built. I was in the kitchen, tidying up the counter, pretending the clatter of dishes could drown out my thoughts. The house was quiet, too quiet. A laugh drifted from the living room. Soft, casual, but not the warmth I remembered. Curiosity overpowered caution. I stepped closer, careful to stay unseen. Their voices, my son, and his wife. "Well, she thinks she's done enough," she said, her tone clipped, almost impatient. "Yeah, she doesn't know everything," he murmured, distracted, glancing away as he spoke. I froze. A chill spread from my chest to my toes. $400,000. My home, my life. Had I misunderstood? Could it be coincidence? Or had I been blind all this time? I gripped the edge of the counter until my knuckles whitened. Every ounce of love, every sacrifice, every sleepless night I gave for him now felt uncertain. I wanted to speak, to call out, to demand truth. But my voice refused to come. I retreated silently, step by step, back to the hallway. Heart pounding, breath shallow. Tears threatened, but I didn't let them fall. I leaned against the wall. The sunlight through the window felt harsh. The warmth of the house I had loved, now unbearable. I wanted to scream. I wanted to run, but all I could do was stand and listen to the quiet that followed. And in that silence, a terrifying thought took root. This wasn't what I had thought, not at all. I didn't fully understand yet, but the world had shifted. The familiar had turned cold, and somewhere deep inside, a quiet, impossible dread began to grow. A sense that soon, silence alone would not be enough. I waited in the living room, hands folded, every instinct alert, yet my voice stayed steady. He entered quietly, eyes darting away from mine. "Mom," he began, hesitant. I did not answer. I did not need to. We sat across from each other. Sunlight fell through the window, stretching across the floor. The same sunlight that had once warmed this home. Now, a reminder of everything I had lost. I thought you'd understand," he said, careful. I stayed silent. I needed help," he added. His words were calm, almost casual. But I could feel the weight of his avoidance, the subtle shift in his eyes, the fear of being seen. I leaned forward slightly. "Help," I whispered. "The kind I gave you with my house, my life, my trust. You've treated it like it was nothing." He stiffened. A flicker of unease passed across his face. "Mom, I did." His voice faltered. "I didn't mean." I stopped him with a quiet shake of my head. "I heard enough," I said, soft but firm. "And I understood." He shifted in his chair, unable to meet my gaze. It's complicated," he murmured defensively. No raised voices. No dramatics. Just the unbearable silence of a mother who had realized the full measure of betrayal. I folded my hands, the hollowness pressing in. Something fundamental had ended. Trust, safety, the simple certainty of being seen and respected. And in that quiet, I knew nothing could restore it. The mornings had lost their warmth. Sunlight fell across empty chairs, the kettle whistled, and steam rose, vanishing before it could comfort anyone. Once, this kitchen had been alive with conversation and laughter. Now, it felt deliberately hollow, as if the house itself had learned to keep me at a distance. I poured tea and carried it to the table, expecting him to appear. Half of me hoped he would. Half of me dreaded the emptiness. No one arrived. The clink of my spoon against porcelain sounded unusually loud, a reminder that I was no longer central to anyone's day. Walking through the rooms, memories pressed against me. The living room where he had learned to crawl felt foreign. The sofa where I had comforted scraped knees seemed colder, sharper. Photographs lined the walls, silent witnesses to decades of care. But I realized something new. These walls held my past, not my present. My presence was no longer woven into this life. I was being left behind. Calls went unanswered. Messages lingered. Small silences, once ignorable, now screamed. I was no longer expected. And somewhere between hope and dread, I noticed the quiet truth. This absence was not accidental. Each delay, each polite excuse was intentional. I was being phased out. Even small gestures, once comforting, no longer reached me. Tea set for one, chairs left empty, doors closed quietly but decisively. The son I had raised treated me with neutral politeness, avoiding warmth, avoiding connection. His wife's subtle coldness confirmed what my heart had feared. My place in this home and in his life was shrinking. And yet, amidst the emptiness, a spark of clarity surfaced. I realized that waiting for acknowledgement, for affection, for recognition, was no longer love. It was endurance that cost me my dignity. This realization did not come with anger or shouting. It arrived quietly, like a gentle but firm hand guiding me to wakefulness. I walked to the window, tracing frost patterns with my fingertips, and felt a resolve forming. I would not allow myself to vanish quietly into the spaces between their lives. I would protect what remained of my heart, my independence, my presence. The silence was theirs, but the next steps could be mine. I sat back in the chair, tea untouched, and let the quiet settle differently this time. Awareness had replaced passive despair. The loneliness remained, but it was no longer total. Somewhere in the stillness, I understood. I could endure, yes, but I would no longer be invisible. Something had shifted. Change, subtle but inevitable, was coming. Losing the house had been a blow I could see, touch, and count. $400,000 gone. A home that had held decades of memories gone. But as the days stretched on, I realized something far heavier had been taken, something no check or walls could ever measure. It wasn't the money, not the furniture, not the rooms I had polished and filled with warmth. What truly broke me was the erosion of trust, the quiet shift in his eyes, the subtle weight of avoidance, the polite words that never carried affection. My son, the boy I had guided, the man I had protected, had become a ranger in his own home. And in that space between familiarity and absence, my dignity began to unravel. Each small act ignored questions, brief nods, glances that skimmed past me, was a reminder that I was no longer central to the life I had nurtured. Security, once as constant as the rising sun, now felt fragile and fleeting. The certainty that love would protect me, that family would honor me, had slipped away. And yet, amid the quiet devastation, I noticed something else. I was still here. I still carried myself with the same hands that had cooked, cleaned, and comforted. I still had my memories, my voice, the knowledge of my worth. The house had gone, yes, but it could not take away the life I had lived, nor the woman I still was. I walked slowly through the empty rooms, letting my fingertips brush over door frames, counters, the nook where I had sipped my morning coffee for years. I whispered to myself, "This is not bitterness. Not yet. Just honest, quiet grief. A pause to honor what had been taken." In that stillness, I understood a deeper truth. Life's cruelties are not always loud. They arrive in silence, in omission, in the slow retreat of those we love. And yet, the depth of that pain also brought clarity. Even when family falters, even when love is withheld, my heart, my dignity, my sense of self, these remain mine to hold. I sat in the quiet, eyes on the empty room, letting shadows of loss settle. No anger filled the space. No bitterness clouded the air. only the raw, honest ache of being set aside. And somewhere beneath the hurt, I felt the fragile stirrings of resilience, a quiet promise that, while the world had changed, I had not, and that perhaps the next step would be mine to choose. There comes a moment in life when you realize that even the deepest love has its limits. I had given everything, my home, my savings, my hands, my heart. And yet, I was still unprotected from disappointment, still vulnerable to betrayal. I had learned a lesson no mother wants to face. Giving too much, without preserving space for oneself, can leave even the strongest hearts unmoored. I thought of boundaries, a word I had rarely used with my children. I had assumed love itself was enough, that sacrifice would always be returned. But life has a way of testing intentions. Sometimes the hardest lessons come not from cruelty, but from quiet neglect. Sitting by the window, I traced the frost patterns winter had left overnight. They were intricate and fleeting, delicate in their own way, yet impermanent, like my efforts, like the trust I had placed in others. In that stillness, I began to understand that love cannot thrive without respect, and respect cannot exist without boundaries. It was not anger that filled me, nor bitterness. It was recognition. Recognition that my worth was not measured by what I could give or how much I could endure. Dignity and self-respect are treasures that must be guarded, even when it feels impossible. I thought about my son, my daughter-in-law, the quiet betrayals that hollowed our home, and I let the weight settle. Not to crush me, but to teach me. For the first time in months, I imagined a life that included myself, my comfort, my voice, my choices. A life where giving did not mean disappearing, where love could coexist with boundaries, and where my presence could be valued, not merely tolerated. The shift was subtle, almost imperceptible, but it was real. I pressed my hands against the cool glass, feeling my heartbeat, and whispered softly, "I am still here. I am still whole." Though I had learned the hard way, I would carry forward not just the pain, but the wisdom it brought. And perhaps, one day, that quiet awareness would bloom into something brighter, a life honoring both love given and love preserved. A life that remembers the value of me, and that begins today, with the choices I make for myself. If I could speak to my younger self, I would hold her hands and tell her, "It is okay to love fiercely, but it is also okay to protect your own heart." I would whisper that giving everything does not make you weak. It simply means you are human. Even humans have limits. I would remind her that mistakes are not failures. They are lessons in disguise. The sleepless nights, the anxious waiting, the hope that blinded her to caution. These were all part of learning to value herself as much as she valued others. I would tell her not to fear saying no, not to feel guilty for needing rest, space, or acknowledgement. She might not understand at first. She might resist. But over time, she would see that boundaries are not walls. They are paths to wiser love, calmer days, and lasting dignity. And I would ask her to accept herself, to release the guilt for choices made in trust, in hope, in the belief that family would always return the care she poured out. Forgive the moments of naivety, of blind generosity, of believing that sacrifice alone could secure affection. Acceptance is the seed of peace, and it is in peace that she will find strength she never knew she had. I would tell her to carry that strength forward, not as armor against others, but as a reminder of her own worth. To walk with quiet confidence, knowing that her life, her decisions, and her heart all have value, whether others recognize it or not. And perhaps most importantly, I would tell her to keep her voice, even if it trembles, to speak gently but firmly for herself as she has always spoken for those she loves. The most enduring lessons in life are learned when we honor both love given and love retained. Looking back now, I see the girl I once was, and I feel tenderness for her courage, her hope, and her mistakes. I feel pride that despite everything, she is still here, still believing, still trying, still capable of love. I would tell her, "You did your best, and that is all anyone could ask. You are whole, you are worthy. And though the world may have tested you in ways you did not deserve, your heart remains intact, your spirit unbroken, and your dignity whole. I'm telling you this now, not because I want pity, and not because I want to relive the hurt. I'm telling you because I wish someone had told me, years ago, what I am about to share. It's easy to give everything, to trust completely, to believe that love will always be returned in the same measure. But sometimes, even the people we love most fall short. Sometimes, giving without boundaries leaves us standing alone in rooms that should have felt like home. Remember this, your heart is precious, and so is your dignity. Love fully, yes, but protect yourself too. Saying no when it matters is not weakness. Asking for respect is not selfish. Holding space for your own safety, your own comfort, that is not betrayal. That is survival. Even when trust is broken, hope does not have to end. There are new mornings, quiet ones filled with your own choices. Moments of warmth you can create for yourself, small, simple, meaningful. You may not get the home you imagined, or the family you hoped would stand beside you, but there is still life to be lived, still love to be felt, still value in your own hands, in your own heart. If you take anything from my story, let it be this. Being careful doesn't mean you've lost hope. Boundaries do not mean bitterness. Protect and honor yourself. Don't wait for anyone's permission to be seen, heard, or valued. I am sharing this with you today because the lessons I learned the hard way, they do not have to be yours. You can choose awareness before pain. You can choose calm strength instead of silent suffering. You can choose to walk forward with your heart intact, even if the world around you falters. This is my story, my warning, my quiet hope. And if it reaches even one person who needs it, then the pain, the loss, the quiet heartbreak, they were not endured in vain.